this war is going nowhere and Ukraine doesn't have the troops to actually kind of launch something, even if there was another massive buildup of artillery pieces, personnel carriers, tanks, and all the rest of it, which isn't happening anyway. So that's why they want Tomahawk missiles to kind of escalate and actually provoke, because Zelensky knows it would provoke a really harsh reaction from the Russian side, which risks drawing NATO closer into the fight, which, you know, is a doomsday scenario, quite frankly.
And let's just talk about some of the military fundamentals that would be involved with this. One of the reasons why Russia has been going so much slower here in, say, the last 3 or 4 months in particular, is because they have clearly made some sort of strategic calculation that they're going to minimize friendly casualties and try to maximize enemy casualties with firepower. And so as a result, you see very, very small numbers of troops, whether it's 2 and 3 vehicles sometimes, or sometimes 2 and 3 individuals crossing in certain areas or on motorbikes, etc. So they don't have any mass forces. If you mass your forces, especially for Ukraine to launch some sort of offensive, then your casualties are just going to go through the roof, because Russia has all of the ways, whether with drones, artillery, glide bombs, and the like, they could really impose huge casualties. If you don't have mass, then just like the Russians are going slow, so too would a Ukrainian. Any way you want to dice this and slice this, it's going to increase the casualties for the Ukraine side, and they don't have casualties, troops to give over. So and let me just ask you, do you think that if the theater really is to try and provoke some sort of a big response from Russia, that somehow that's going to make somebody in NATO go, that's terrible, I can't believe Russia's doing that, you know what, I'm going to join the war? Is there any possibility of that happening?
Well, the European NATO allies have been very timid so far, as you know, even after the kind of drone incursions into Poland, that sort of MiG-31s at 12 minutes in Estonian sort of airspace. But I mean, you know, the rhetoric is going up in volume all the time, particularly from the Polish side, as you've undoubtedly kind of spotted. I don't think there's, you know, they certainly don't have the troops, let alone the appetite to kind of to join in. But the risk of that grows all the time, depending, because, you know, we don't know how the Russians would respond. We can judge what they did 1 year ago, you know, with the Oreshnik. At that time, people were talking about them possibly targeting the logistics facility inside of Poland, you know, for a tactical kind of strike using conventional munitions, by the way. But I mean, actually, the point is, from the Russian perspective, you know, they're happy with this slow grinding progress, because actually they're not fighting for land, they're fighting for time. I mean, they know that the Europeans are running out of money to keep bankrolling Zelensky, and all they need to do is to have a fairly static campaign, making small probes here and there, just gradually bleeding, you know, Europe dry of cash. This is no longer really about Ukraine. It's really about sort of, you know, Europe slowly imploding upon itself as it tries, you know, to keep the war going. I think that is the real sort of fight in Putin's mind. He's fighting with time, and he's in no hurry to, you know, launch any big conventional offensive. He's happy to sit by and watch. So that's what makes, you know, Zelensky's gamble such a gamble, because he now wants to kind of, you know, go 2 steps up the escalation ladder, which is what the Tomahawk issue would represent. And that's why I don't think Trump will agree. But, you know, I'm possibly more optimistic than you, Danny.
You might be, but Zelensky himself is certainly not deterred by anything. In fact, a lot of boisterous comments coming in just the last 36, 48 hours out of Europe from Ursula von der Leyen again, and definitely from Mark Rutte, from your own British Secretary of Defense, all kinds of comments. And in that environment, that positive environment, and those bellicose comments from senior European leaders, you have Volodymyr Zelensky getting ready to come in town and saying this.
We have also already prepared our part of the homework ahead of the meeting with President Trump, both the military component and the economic one. Every detail, everything is ready. The agenda of our meeting with the President of the United States is very substantive, and I thank everyone who is helping. This can truly bring the war closer to an end. There is a new sanctions package from Britain. There are dozens of people who help Russia fight, and there is also a ship of the Russian fleet carrying oil. We will definitely synchronize this package in our jurisdiction and work so that other partners equally put pressure on Russia for the sake of a real end, an end to the war. Putin should earn less, and then there will be more security in the world. And things like Patriot and Tomahawks can lay a long-term foundation for peace.
So he's claiming that economic issues with sanctions and stealing Russian shadow fleet, so-called, on the seas, Tomahawks, and more help on the front line. Is there any reason to think his consequence that he claimed there, that this would bring peace and this will cause Russia to finally stop the war? How do you see it?
I see there's absolutely zero chance of that, quite frankly, Danny, that, even if the US, which I don't think they will, agree to a handful of Tomahawks, the Russians have got the weight to escalate with, missiles of their own, which are better, frankly, I'm sorry to say, than the Tomahawk. So, as we saw last year, so I mean, he's so full of his own, propaganda that you have to admire the man's confidence, quite frankly. Ukraine is a bankrupt country. It is a bankrupt country. It depends on 50 billion a year from us now, the Europe, no longer from the US, to keep the war going. And he just expects us to provide it, even though they're losing, even though Ukrainians are dying every day, the cities are being destroyed. We're getting into the winter. The energy infrastructure has been degraded again. People won't be able to heat their homes. He doesn't care. I mean, once the war's over, he's out of a job. So he's just rolling on with the same old, propaganda and meaningless and actually quite dangerous, rhetorical statements.
Okay, so I can understand why he might be saying this. As much as I disagree with it, as much as I can factually refute nearly all of his contentions and just irrational pages, he is in the mix, and he does have a lot of personal consequence if he gives in to reality. So even though he's wrong, I can understand why he would. Where I have a more difficult time, and this is what I really am asking you to help illuminate us here, is why all these senior European leaders, UK folks, France, Germany, I mean, all these folks across, obviously Poland and some of the others, why are they saying things that imply that, no, they think that really this could actually cause enough pain and pressure on Russia to get them to back down? But what is that based on, and what do they really hope to accomplish?
Well, it's not based on intelligence, and it never has been. But what I think it's based on is the fact they've invested so heavily, in Zelensky, that they worry about the domestic political consequences for each of them. When he fails, as he surely will, all they're doing is kicking the can of failure down the road and hoping they'll be able to manage it. When it comes all across Europe, we're seeing nationalist political parties on the rise because they see the kind of globalist leaders are completely ignoring their interests, pushing a proxy war, in Ukraine, and so on. And Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, Emmanuel Macron, they're all in different ways in political trouble domestically right now. If they kind of, cut the legs from under Zelensky's chair, then they're going to have to explain to their voters why they've been saying all along that Ukraine can win when it's clear that they never could.
Well, so and that leads to my puzzlement, I guess, because you can, rationally speaking, you should be able to calculate that you can't kick that can down the road much further. And so if you continue to invest in this rhetoric and you see the political damage it's already causing to some and the danger that it's putting all those you just mentioned in there, then one would also rationally think that they would say, okay, this can only get worse for us. It can't get better. We're going to have to do something different. And yet they don't. What might be the calculation to try and kick a can down the road that will almost certainly build up more negative consequences for themselves?
I mean, part of it is just the herd mentality. I mean, political leaders don't always operate and act in rational ways, as we're seeing, especially as we're seeing in Ukraine. Friedrich Merz has another 3 years in power. Keir Starmer has another, 3 years, in office. Macron can go through to 2027. If he wants to, even though he's in political trouble, right now, that they can kick it down for another year, sell Zelensky out, maybe next year, and still have another year or so to sort of, rebuild their fences for another election. But for whatever reason, they don't seem to be ready to rip off that plaster. Right now, they're still stuck in their own propaganda. But as you say, that they can't kick it down the road forever. But I mean, I think, the reckoning is coming. I still personally think the war is going to go on until 2026 because I think none of them are ready to kind of face up to that, right now.
Yeah, of course, it remains to be seen whether the Ukraine army can continue to fight through into 2026, although we're getting closer toward the end of this year here too. But I guess that there is some rationale for some of these leaders, if they think they can go that long, then maybe they feel like, all right, well, when the time comes, we'll build up some of the reason why I did everything I could and these people failed us or so. Do you see any like seeds of that being planted now, where they might could say, when if let's say, for example, that the Ukraine army does eventually collapse, and it doesn't matter how much ammunition, weapons, or money you give, they just aren't able to maintain their consistency and the coherence as a fighting force, and they end up collapsing. Where do you perceive that the European leaders would then switch the claims and the blame so that it's not my fault?
Yeah, I don't actually see the Ukrainian army collapse. I know lots of people talk about it. I don't see it happening. They still have, a million sort of people at arms, even though some of them are forcibly, put at arms. I think it's a far more resilient force. And as I said before, I think Putin is playing the long game anyway. He's not really concerned about any big Hail Mary moves. He's happy to watch, the Europeans kind of, bleed dry. But when that moment happens, I think actually inevitably, there's going to be a big political shift within Europe, with actually definitely France, but also possibly the UK moving towards an explicitly nationalist government, with a national rally in France, and very possibly it's not inconceivable of a Reform Party in the UK. And I think the big risk there when that happens, because I don't think they will be able to package failure. They've been lying to people for so long about this stupid war, saying that, that Putin's going to die tomorrow and the economy is going to implode the next day and that sort of thing for so long. People will see right through that. So I don't think there is a good way to package it. So the big systemic risk here is to the European Union itself. Because if France, gets national rally, they decide to leave, then that sort of means potentially the whole project is going to implode when they realise that they can't afford to actually, bring Ukraine into full membership anyway, because they don't have the money. So it's just Europe literally is in a sort of slow death spiral right now. That's how I see it, and that's why the fear factor is so high. Why people don't want to kind of confront this awful kind of burning elephant in the corner of the room.
What's really sad, you may be right. I've often said that it's impossible to tell ahead of time what an army is going to do when it comes under pressure. For example, you had the German army in World War II that never broke, no matter how much they couldn't win, no matter how thin their troops got. They fought all the way to the literal end in Berlin, and they never gave up, even though there was literally no hope for success. And then you had at the first of World War II, the British and French armies in France, who were supposed to be the most powerful continental forces on the planet. And instead, they buckled in less than a month when things turned upside down. You just never know. So I can't make any predictions. But the one thing I'll point out is the perversity and the catastrophe. If they did the German model and never broke, all that would do is ensure that even more of them die an unnecessary death. And what a cruel twist of fate that would be. But we'll have to wait and see how that's going to work out.
And the thing is, Russia isn't needing to do any sort of mass mobilization of troops. I mean, by all accounts, and I follow, I do still have friends in Russia, sue me, but, life is for many people carrying on largely as normal there, actually. But that's not the same in Ukraine. Young men above the age of 25 still are being dragged off the streets. That simply isn't happening in Russia. That's another reason why, Putin doesn't really want to kind of, go big on it, because actually, his country is kind of carrying on a fairly normal existence, while watching Europe die. There's no need for him to do any more than that right now, it seems to me.
You can certainly make that argument. One of the arguments on the other side, though, is what we're claiming, and maybe part of the reason why some of these leaders have these views that they can keep going on the Western I'm talking about, is you have people like General Ben Hodges. I hesitate to even bring him up, haven't brought him in for a while, but some of the stuff he's saying right now is still getting currency. People are still listening to it. And here's what he thinks, that he's kind of echoing, in a sense, what Trump said in the Truth Social a little over a week ago, that Russia's a paper tiger. Here's his version.
I have always believed that Ukraine was going to win this war, and that Russia was moving towards trouble. But now it feels like, at least in the White House, now they have like, holy shit, the Ukrainians are doing good, the Russians are failing. And Other people are now starting to realize this false narrative out there that the Russians, of course, were pushing, that it was inevitable that they would win. There was no way that little Ukraine could beat mighty Russia, and that's been proven false. Now, how's the war going depends a little bit on where you're fighting. If you're in a trench outside Pokrovsk, or if you're in a city that is constantly hit by Russian missiles, it's terrible. But if you can step back from the terrible tactical situation and look at the bigger picture, there's no way that Russia, in my view, can actually defeat Ukraine.
That's painful to me to watch, even again, as I just watched it, because you see him lay the foundation in the first half that now it's been proven that Russia can't win and Ukraine is improving, they're doing better. And then he actually says with his own mouth, of course, if you look at the tactical situation, well, that sucks for Ukraine. And if you look at the operational situation in the air, well, yeah, that sucks too, because there's no counter for any of it. But everywhere else, it's good. And now then, when you look at the bigger picture, what's the bigger picture if this close picture is bad? I think if you look at the bigger picture, you tell me if I'm wrong, is even worse than the tactical view.
Well, it is, because Ukraine is becoming a failed state. And it's a failed state that Europe will have to pay for. I mean, that is the big picture. I mean, all the stuff about trenches in Pokrovsk, he's right. It's probably the only thing he was right on. It is correct. I mean, it must be absolutely horrendous. The big picture is Ukraine is a failed state, and we are helping it to fail, and we're paying for the privilege as well at the cost of $50 to $80 billion a year, because it's not just the $50 billion a year to fight the war. It's the $30 billion a year to make up for their massive current account deficits every year as well, because they can't export anything. Even Poland won't import their grain because it's too cheap. Good old Poland. So that is the big picture: state failure, and it's on our cards, and we're paying for that massive golden card, which Zelensky will bank somewhere in Switzerland or the British Virgin Islands, no doubt.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of show people what we're talking about, since he brought it up, is the tactical situation, and I'll just look at two big ones here. This is the Pokrovsk agglomeration, what they call here, and you can see that Russia has it's still slow, but you see now then half of the city is either under full or most Russian control. They've taken the citadel here in the south. Now then they're moving further close into the southern part of Mirnograd. Here in this the southern part of it here, we're going to move it into the north, and then this is where you mentioned a minute ago that Ukraine has tried some counter attacks, and these are some of the areas where they've tried to cut off this penetration here north of Pokrovsk. They have not succeeded, whereas now Russia's trying to move back into Shakova. They've taken this Volodymyrivka in the south, retaken that a couple of times. This has changed hands actually several times here, but Ukraine doesn't have the power to block it off. And then the other big one up here in the north, of course, is to Kupiansk. And then you see that that now is more than half taken or controlled fully by the Russian side. Only these parts of it are still on the Ukraine control, and there's just nothing that's going to reverse it. Nothing, even these tactical operations that come, all they do is just put a temporary dent, and then Russia will end up losing, the Ukraine will end up losing what they had gained here. So when you look at the tactical side, that's what you see. When you look at the operational side, Russia is continuing to expand their capability in these long-range drones. Their missile capacity continues to expand everywhere you look. So big picture, medium picture, large picture, what the heck? I don't understand why people keep on saying this stuff over and over.
Yeah, well, Hodges, goodness me, he's just yet another talking head, really. He sounds like somebody who's read absolutely nothing in detail about sort of Russian doctrine at all. And he's just kind of making things up as he goes along. But we have British generals who do exactly the same thing, so it's nothing personal. But this seems to kind of run hot in the gung ho community.